So this is the first of a quite long series of articles about the way that we make use of statistics in our institutions. Well, lots of what we do requires and relies on data, and that data has to be collected and it has to be analysed. For example, we routinely ask our stakeholders, students, faculty, alumni, employers and so on, to fill out questionnaires. And apparently we're interested in the results. If we're reporting on performance indicators, we most often need to quantify some measure, which is based on sometimes a great deal of data. Now, I've used three words just now that I want to follow up in detail. Briefly in this occasion, but in more detail in upcoming articles. And those three words were collected, analysed, and apparently. So let's start with the first, data collection. So the first idea is what data we collect and how we collect it. I am, I think, surprised at just how many questionnaires we're forcing on our stakeholders and on our students in particular. There is, after all, an idea of survey overload, and I wonder how many of us who are in higher education data collection fill out every request for information that regularly comes our way. I know that I usefully avoid providing feedback for example, to most hotels that I stay in. In fact, I typically respond only when I've got some complaint or I've been unhappy with the service. And I think that in itself should be something that we're aware of in our professional data collection, but we're usually not. Some students require students to fill out their surveys in order to get their grades. This seems to me a very strange idea, and one that mixes up a lot of motives together with a muddled sense of responsibility and accountability, and that's an idea that we'll explore in detail later. Another issue concerns the questionnaires themselves. I see a lot in my consulting life, and it has to be said, very many are very poorly designed. There's a great deal of scholarship in the area of qualitative research. Indeed, we teach it in our universities and colleges, and yet some of the questionnaires we design wouldn't even get a passing grade in our own courses on this topic. Again, this is something we'll look at in detail on another occasion. The second word was analysis. I want to look at data analysis, and this is a massive topic, and we'll spend a lot of time looking at this in much more detail later. But let me just here mention two big issues. There are more, and we'll cover them later, but today I just want to introduce the topic. First, much of the data that we collect comes from surveys that use Likert scales. These are the familiar, usually 5-point scales from very satisfied to very unsatisfied. I'm sure you know these very well. Such data is properly termed ordinal data, and this means that the measurements are points in an order, first, second, third, fourth, etc., rather than 1, 2, 3, which is cardinal data. The measurements of, say, for example, the heights of our students would be cardinal data, whereas their views on the library or the catering facilities would be ordinal data from a Likert scale. The problem is that we most often analyse our ordinal data incorrectly, as if it was cardinal data. It's not correct to take the mean, that is the simple average, of ordinal data, or indeed the standard deviation, that is the degree of spread around the average. We will see, in fact, that it's possible for student satisfaction to fall even when the average, when taken as a mean, goes up. There is a problem. Sometimes we are asked by others, including national bodies, for such incorrect analyses. Well, then there's not much we can do about it. But really, for our own purposes, we should be doing much better. And secondly, I'm shocked at how often data is aggregated before analysed, and then how only such aggregated results are used as the basis for decision making. For example, I might see a figure of 3.7, representing the student satisfaction for the entire university. Well, what does that figure mean? It's probably hiding much more than it's revealing. It is, of course, quite possible that some departments or programmes are doing really well, whereas others are doing really badly. Are we presently presenting data in a way and to the right audience that best reveals the important information that it contains? Well, we'll ask this question again in a future article. And the final word I said was apparently, so let me talk about that. I said in the introduction that we are apparently interested in what the data tells us. And the reason for the caveat is that most often I see analysis and presentation of data that deliberately gives the best possible interpretation of that data. There are many ways of doing this, and we will examine them all later. But here's something I read only yesterday in a report. 76% of our students were satisfied by something. And that was followed by, well, nothing else at all. Of course, had the sentence read 24% of our students were dissatisfied by, then it would have been impossible not to have made some further comment. Well, presumably, no follow-up had been undertaken with those 24%, which is a quarter of the students. So there was nothing that could have been said. I'm afraid we tend to go through the motions with all this analysis. We collect the data poorly, we analyse it poorly, and then we try to ignore the results. Well, that's a rather provocative set of claims, but this blog is supposed to be provocative. And so, as you will see, I'll be making good justifications for all these rather negative conclusions in future articles.